You wake up at 3 a.m. with a sharp, icy chill deep in your hip joints, a sensation like wet cement hardening in your marrow. This stiffness has been stealing your mornings for months, slowly turning your body into a heavy, rusted cage. You've watched your steady hands start to betray you with a persistent flutter that makes even holding a pen a struggle. You've tried the heating pads, the ointments, and the supplements, but the relief never lasts. What if this agonizing pain isn't an enemy, but a vital messenger warning you of a hidden collapse? In the next few minutes, you will finally understand what is really happening. My name is Arthur William Vance, and at 72, I've spent my life ensuring that foundations are deep enough to hold the weight of the world. As a retired senior civil engineer, I built bridges that survived hurricanes, but I couldn't bridge the silence left by my wife, Martha, 4 years ago. I still keep her yellow roses blooming in the garden, the ones she planted the day our son was born, and I can almost smell the lavender soap she used on her Sunday dresses. Since she passed, a terrifying cold has settled in my bones, a fear that I am becoming invisible, a structural relic that no longer serves any purpose in this world. My world now revolves around my son Julian, his wife Clara, and my bright granddaughter Mia, who represents my final and most precious project. Every morning at precisely 7, I feed the birds and then drink my coffee black while reviewing old blueprints, clinging to the memory of when my hands were steady and my word was law. Before we dive deeper into how this family structure crumbled, I want to thank you for joining me today. Please comment below with the city you are watching from, as it helps me feel less alone. Please remember that while this account is based on real events, certain names and locations have been fictionalized for privacy. It began with a misplaced receipt from St. Jude's Medical Center, dated March 12, 2026. I found it tucked behind the toaster while cleaning the crumbs from my morning toast. It was a bill for a comprehensive cardiac stress test, a procedure I had undergone just last week. The total was exactly $482, but the insurance authorization code didn't match the one on my digital portal. I felt a slight flutter in my chest, a physical echo of the structural instability I used to detect in aging concrete. I told myself it was a clerical error, a simple transposition of numbers by a tired intern. I put it back, but my hands remained cold. 2 days later, I noticed the trash bin in the study was overflowing with shredded white paper. In the center of the mess sat a discarded page from my old engineering ledger, dated July 1984. On the margin, someone had scrawled my name, Arthur Vance, dozens of times in a script that lacked my characteristic right-handed tremor. It was my signature, but it was too clean, too fluid, like a bridge with no expansion joints. The ink was a synthetic blue that my vintage Mont Blanc could never produce. A silent alarm triggered in my mind, a suspicion without a name that sat heavy in my stomach. Why was my own son practicing my identity in the dark? I spent decades inspecting bridges, looking for the hairline fractures that precede a total collapse. Now, I applied that same forensic rigor to my own living room. I waited until Julian and Clara took Mia to her ballet practice at 4:30 p.m. on March 18, 2026. My heart hammered against my ribs as I retreated to the attic, where I kept my old oak filing cabinet. I didn't reach for my engineering blueprints. I went straight for the locked drawer labeled Family Legacy. My hands were cold, the metal key slippery with sweat. I needed to see the original deeds Julian claimed were safe in his possession, because a structure built on a lie cannot stand. The first concrete anomaly was as sharp as a jagged rebar. I found a carbon copy of a property assessment authorization, dated February 14, 2026. The document was stamped by Sterling Real Estate Services and valued our family home at exactly $1,250,000. But there was a signature at the bottom, my signature, dated on a day I was flat on my back at Mercy General Hospital. I was recovering from a respiratory infection, hooked up to an IV drip, and unable to hold a spoon, let alone a pen. The script was an insult, a clean, soulless imitation of the man I used to be before the tremors took hold. I moved to my laptop, my fingers fumbling over the keys as I logged into my private Merrill Lynch investment portal. I had 3 separate accounts: my primary pension, the Martha Vance Memorial Trust, for Mia's education, and a rainy day fund. My breath hitched when I saw the balance of the rainy day fund. On March 5th, a wire transfer of $84,000 had been executed to an entity called JV Strategic Holdings. There was no record of my authorization, no confirmation email, and no memory of ever hearing that name. The transaction fee was a precise $25, a small clinical price for the theft of my security and my son's integrity. I knew I couldn't handle this structural failure alone. I needed a specialist who understood the legal foundations of our state. I called Dr. Helena Sterling, a sharp-witted probate attorney who had been Martha's closest friend since they attended university together in 1974. Helena is 71 now, but her mind is like a polished scalpel, capable of cutting through the thickest layers of bureaucratic deception. We met at the back booth of O'Malley's Diner at 2:15 p.m., far from the prying eyes of my neighbors. As I laid the scanned copies on the laminate table, her expression shifted from professional concern to a cold, focused fury that mirrored the ice in my marrow. Helena didn't say a word for 3 long minutes as she examined the fraudulent dates against my hospital discharge papers. She pulled a leather-bound tablet from her briefcase and accessed the county's public records database using her professional credentials. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of pity and rage. "This is far worse than a simple forged signature on a house sale." She pointed to a filing from 3 weeks ago, a durable power of attorney that Julian had submitted to the state. It granted him total control over my medical decisions and financial assets, claiming I was suffering from progressive cognitive decline and was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. The first layer of the conspiracy peeled away like rotting wallpaper. Helena discovered that the JV Strategic Holdings account wasn't a business venture. It was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The money Julian stole from my rainy day fund hadn't gone toward my future retirement luxury, as he so often promised during our Sunday dinners. Instead, it had been funneled through 3 different intermediaries to settle high-interest debts, with a firm known for aggressive collections. My son wasn't just planning for my golden years. He was liquidating my life to pay for a gambling addiction that had clearly spiraled out of his control long before Martha's roses began to wither. The second layer revealed a cruelty I hadn't thought Julian was capable of harboring. Helena found a secret listing on a high-end estate auction site, antiquelegacies.com. It featured photos of Martha's mahogany vanity, my grandfather's collection of vintage surveying tools, and the very dining table where we had shared 40 years of Christmas dinners. The auction was set to close in less than 48 hours, with the seller identified as a representative of the Vance estate. Julian was selling my memories while I was still breathing, treating my life like a warehouse of discarded inventory. The scale of the betrayal was no longer a crack. It was a total structural collapse of our family. I returned home that evening, the weight of the truth sitting in my stomach like a bucket of wet cement. Julian was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as he poured me a glass of expensive Cabernet. "How was your walk, Dad?" he asked, his smile reaching his eyes but not his soul. I looked at his hands, the hands I had taught to build birdhouses, and wondered how they could be the same hands that were systematically erasing my existence. The risk felt personal now, a physical threat lurking behind every "I love you" and every gentle pat on the back. I had to keep the mask on, even as the walls of my own house closed in. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if the ceiling fan was the only thing Julian hadn't sold yet. I realized then that the fake medical report was the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal. If he could prove I was confused, my word would mean nothing in court. I am standing at a crossroads, and every step I take could be my last as a free man. Before we continue this investigation into the darkness of a son's greed, I need to know your opinion on this impossible situation. Do you think Arthur should confront Julian immediately, or wait for Helena to gather more evidence? Type "confront" or "wait" in the comments below. Helena and I spent the night of March 19, 2026 in her basement office, surrounded by stacks of bank statements and digital logs. The JV Strategic Holdings account was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. We traced a series of small recurring payments, exactly $200 each, made to a private security firm called Sentinel Eyes. These payments began shortly after Martha's funeral in 2022. I realized with a jolt of terror that my own home had been bugged for years. Julian hadn't just been waiting for me to fail. He had been actively monitoring my every conversation, my every prayer to Martha, and my every moment of vulnerability to build a case of dementia. The investigation took a darker turn when Helena accessed Clara's private correspondence via a subpoena she'd prepared for a different case. On January 12th, Clara sent an encrypted message to an unknown recipient, discussing the final liquidation of the Vance assets. She wasn't a victim of Julian's debt. She was the architect of the distribution. She had already contacted a luxury liquidation firm in Zurich to move the proceeds of the house sale into a trust under her maiden name. The cruelty was surgical. My daughter-in-law, the woman who brought my granddaughter Mia to see me every Sunday, was counting the days until I was legally declared a non-person for her profit. We found the source of the fraudulent medical report that claimed I was mentally unfit. It wasn't a clerical error at St. Jude's. It was a deliberate fabrication by Dr. Marcus Thorne, a cardiologist who owed Julian a massive gambling debt from an illegal poker circuit in Atlantic City. The report, filed on February 28, 2026, contained fabricated neurological tests and a forged signature from a specialist I had never even met. Julian had used his influence to buy a medical professional's integrity for the price of a debt cancellation. The realization that my physical health was being weaponized against my legal freedom made the air in Helena's office feel thin and toxic. The external pressure on Julian became visible through a series of threatening text messages we recovered from a burner phone found in his car's glove box. A man identified only as Vinny had been sending photos of Mia's school and our front porch since December 2025. The total debt was staggering, $462,000, accrued through a high-stakes betting ring that Julian had hidden behind his real estate success. This wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about survival. My son had sold my future to pay for his past mistakes, and now the sharks were circling our family home, waiting for the house sale to provide their bloody pound of flesh. I returned to the attic when the house was silent, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. Hidden inside an old insulation panel near the chimney, I found 3 spiral-bound notebooks filled with my name. Julian had practiced my signature thousands of times, dating back to 2023. He had even tried to replicate the slight tremor in my right hand, a detail so chillingly precise it made me want to scream. Beside the notebooks sat a digital recording device containing snippets of my voice, edited together to create phrases I never said. He was building a digital ghost of me, a version of Arthur Vance that would agree to anything he proposed. The theft extended beyond the property and the trust funds. I discovered that Julian had applied for 3 high-limit credit cards in my name on April 5, 2026, using my social security number and a falsified income statement. The balances were already maxed out at $30,000 each. He was systematically hollowing out my credit score, ensuring that even if I survived his attempt to sell the house, I would be a financial pariah, unable to rent an apartment or buy a car. The scope of the network included a complicit notary in a neighboring county who had stamped documents without me ever being present, creating a paper trail of my supposed consent. The risk became physical on the evening of March 21st. Julian arrived home early and found me near the attic stairs. His eyes, usually warm, were as cold as slate. "Dad, you seem confused again," he said, his voice a low, vibrating threat. He took my phone from my hand and placed it on the high kitchen counter where I couldn't easily reach it. He began to gaslight me, claiming I had forgotten our dinner plans and that I had wandered into the street earlier that day. I saw the hidden camera he had installed in the smoke detector, and I realized he was recording my reactions to provoke a visible breakdown for his upcoming court hearing. Helena sent me a scanned document at midnight that nearly stopped my heart. It was a petition for involuntary commitment, drafted for the state court, set to be filed on March 30th. Julian had already secured signatures from 2 complicit witnesses, neighbors I thought were my friends, but who had been bribed with promises of property favors. The petition described me as a danger to myself and others, citing the very incidents Julian was currently manufacturing in our living room. If that paper reached a judge, I wouldn't just lose my house. I would lose my autonomy, locked away in a state facility while Julian liquidated every brick of my 40-year legacy. The clock is ticking toward a total structural failure of my life, and I am standing in a house that has become a prison. Julian is currently in the next room, likely finalizing the details of my disappearance into the system. The conspiracy is no longer a shadow. It is a noose tightening around my neck. I have 48 hours before the commitment papers are filed and the house auction closes. What you are about to see next is truly disturbing, revealing the depths of a son's depravity. If you are sensitive to themes of elder abuse or extreme betrayal, you may want to stop here, as the truth is about to get much darker for the Vance family. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, a metallic toll that felt like a hammer against my sternum. I sat in the dark kitchen, the blue light from Helena's final encrypted email illuminating the deep, structural cracks in my own hands. My stomach performed a slow, sickening roll, a physical protest against the poison my son had been feeding me under the guise of elder vitamins. The document Helena attached wasn't a bank statement. It was a certified copy of the 2006 Irrevocable Family Foundation deed. My lungs tightened, as if the oxygen in the room had suddenly turned to heavy, unbreathable dust. I wasn't just a victim. I was a guardian who had forgotten his own fortress. The truth crashed over me with the force of a collapsing dam, cooling the fire in my veins into a hard, crystalline resolve. Julian had spent years forging my signature on sales agreements, but he had been trying to sell a bridge that was never mine to give. 20 years ago, on the day Mia was born, Martha and I had signed a binding structural mandate that moved the house title into an irrevocable educational trust for our granddaughter. I am merely the life tenant, a temporary occupant with zero legal authority to liquidate the asset. Julian had been practicing my handwriting for years, but he had never bothered to check the foundational deed held in a private vault at First National Bank. I remembered the Christmas of 2024, when Julian had pressed me to sign insurance updates while I was distracted by Mia's laughter. I recall his hands shaking then, a tremor I mistook for seasonal fatigue rather than the frantic desperation of a man drowning in gambling debt. "Every I love you, Dad," he whispered now, felt like a rusted nail driven into the memory of Martha's yellow roses. I had nurtured a snake in the garden she planted, blinded by a father's desperate need to see his legacy as a solid structure. The love I felt for him was now a jagged shard of glass, cutting me from the inside out with every breath. I stood up, my knees cracking like old timber, but my spine was as straight as a steel girder for the first time in years. The gaslighting was over. The engineer was back on the job site to oversee the demolition of a lie. I checked my Mont Blanc pen, the ink as dark as the justice I was about to serve. Tomorrow, at the 9 a.m. notary appointment, Julian thinks he is finalizing my erasure, but he is actually walking into a legal collapse he cannot survive. Before I step into this final, devastating confrontation with my only son, I need to know you are still standing with me. Are you here to witness the truth? Type "I am here" in the comments right now. I walked back into the notary's office at precisely 9:02 a.m. on March 30th, the weight of Helena's legal briefcase pulling at my shoulder like a moral anchor. Julian was already there, pacing the marble floors in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. He flashed that salesman smile, the one he used to sell my memories, and gestured toward the mahogany desk where the clerk, Benjamin, sat waiting with a grim expression. Behind the frosted glass partition, I saw the silhouettes of 2 officers from the 4th Precinct, their presence a silent structural support for the demolition I was about to execute. The air was thick with the scent of impending collapse. "Dad, you're late, and the buyers are waiting on the conference line," Julian said, his voice dripping with a calculated, oily concern that made my skin crawl. He slid the forged sale agreement toward me, but I didn't reach for my Mont Blanc. Instead, I placed the certified copy of the 2006 Irrevocable Family Foundation deed directly on top of his lie. The room went silent, the only sound being the mechanical hum of the air conditioner. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet plaster. "This house was never mine to sell, Julian," I said, my voice steady, "and it certainly wasn't yours to steal from your own daughter." Julian let out a sharp, forced laugh that echoed off the high ceilings like a warning shot. He turned to Benjamin and the waiting witnesses, his eyes wide with a performative pity that was almost convincing. "See? This is exactly what the medical reports warned us about," he proclaimed, gesturing at my chest. "My father is suffering from advanced cognitive delusions. He's hallucinating deeds and trusts that don't exist to avoid the reality of his declining health." He stepped toward me, reaching out in a mock gesture of comfort, but I didn't flinch. I signaled to Helena, who stepped forward with the decrypted logs of his gambling debts and the Zurich liquidation plan. The mask finally shattered when Helena mentioned JV Strategic Holdings and the $462,000 he owed to the Atlantic City poker rings. Julian's composure didn't just break, it detonated. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, screaming that he had spent his life in my shadow, and that the money was his rightful inheritance for the years of emotional labor he had endured. He confessed to every forged signature, every edited voice recording, and every bribe paid to Dr. Thorne, his voice rising to a frantic, jagged pitch that filled the office with the stench of his desperation. He didn't care who heard him. His greed had finally consumed his intellect. The officers stepped from behind the glass, the metallic clink of their handcuffs signaling the end of the Vance family legacy as I knew it. Julian was forced against the desk, his expensive suit jacket bunching up around his neck as his rights were read aloud in a flat, clinical drone. Benjamin provided the official testimony on the spot, confirming the use of the vectorized signature and the fraudulent notary seal Julian had obtained through a corrupt intermediary. Clara stood by the door, her face a mask of frozen terror, as she realized the Zurich accounts had already been frozen by a federal injunction. The public exposure was absolute, witnessed by the very people Julian sought to impress. The legal demolition was swift and irreversible. Julian faced 12 counts of felony identity theft, 3 counts of grand larceny, and a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a state penitentiary. His real estate license was revoked for life, and every penny of the $84,000 he stole was ordered returned to the Martha Vance Memorial Trust. As they led him away, his eyes met mine one last time, filled with a hollow, burning resentment that no bridge could ever span. I walked out of the office and into the afternoon sun, feeling the heavy, cold winter in my bones finally begin to thaw as the truth reclaimed its foundation. It has been 8 months since the marble floors of the notary's office nearly became the site of my financial execution. Today, the Vance family home is no longer a silent museum of grief. It is the Martha Foundation, a registered nonprofit shelter for seniors who, like me, face the cold blade of familial greed. I spent the morning in the garden, pruning the yellow roses that have finally returned to their full, vibrant bloom, their scent mingling with the fresh paint of the new wheelchair ramp. Mia sits on the porch swing now, her college fund secured, and her laughter filling the space where Julian's lies once echoed. The structural integrity of my life is restored. I look at you now because blood is not always a sanctuary. It is often a mask for a predator's intent. My greatest failure was my vanity in believing I could build a man without testing his foundations first. Always remember that the person most likely to stab you in the back is the one you are currently carrying on your shoulders, leading to the ultimate betrayal of the bloodline. May God grant you the discernment to see the truth. If you believe honor should be earned, please like, share, and subscribe. Comment justice below to support us. Please note that while this account reflects real experiences, names have been fictionalized for privacy.